Hello princesses! Today I'm going to be talking about the Apu Personal Tone Foundation in the shade W01. I was super excited to try this foundation when these swatches came out. There are 12 different shades in this foundation, and for an East Asian brand that is a lot of shades, considering they would usually do either one shade for a universal skin or like 2 to 3 shades of generally pretty pale shades. So for this range in particular, like I said, there are 12 shades and there are 4 colours in each of the undertone categories. They have 4 of the cool, 4 of the neutral, and then 4 of the warm toned. And although this is more inclusive and including a couple of darker tones, there is still not an equal amount of dark tones in comparison to the light tones, and the entire collection still does run fairly pale. I was personally deciding between the shades N00 and W01. N00 is the palest shade and it is supposed to be neutral, and then W01 is the next pale shade. C01 is slightly darker than the other two. I decided to go for W01 because my skin is a little slightly more tan than usual, and of course I do have very yellow toned skin, which this one is definitely supposed to be, rather than N00. And yeah, you will see how that goes for me throughout the video. But the product description says, 12 varying colours express natural base expressions as if the skin was wearing the colours. Light and smooth texture adheres delicately to the skin and expresses the base moistly. Microtechnology formula covers the skin with brilliant darkening free foundation layers. The packaging of this foundation is very minimal and elegant. There is no pump, but you can squeeze the foundation out of the tip, which actually still works well. I have the shade W01, which is the second lightest shade in the range and is supposedly warm to yellow toned. It looks fine swatched by itself, but when I swatch it next to other shades like NARS Sheer Glow in Siberia and MAC Studio Fix Fluid in NC10, it looks very neutral, bordering on cool toned, which I think is quite bizarre. I would consider the MAC Studio Fix Fluid in NC10 to be quite neutral, bordering on warm, so to have a shade that is specifically marketed as yellow base to look so neutral beside it is just odd. I also received a sample of W02 in one of my orders, and this is just as neutral, though it is slightly darker. This foundation is pretty easy to apply and applies well with brushes, sponges or cushion puffs. I find that my damp beauty blender gives the smoothest finish, while cushion puffs give the most coverage, so depending on how much coverage I need on the day, depends on how I will apply this foundation. The shade looks pretty bad on me. It's not necessarily too light, but it is definitely the wrong tone, and it makes my neck look super yellow in comparison. It does have decent medium coverage that is buildable and doesn't look cakey. It does tend to stick to dry skin, which isn't very flattering, and I can see a lot of texture around my eyelids where a lot of my dry skin is. Other than the dry skin, it does look quite smooth over the rest of my skin. I was given a sample of the next shade up, which is W02 in my Sweet Korea order, so I wanted to try that one out too. Sadly, the next shade is also pretty neutral toned too, so it looks strange, though as you can see I have tried my best to use a bronzer to make it match my skin. However, if you compare the colour of my chin in both of the videos, you can definitely see that the shades are not that far away from each other and neither are a good match for my skin. After 8 hours, this foundation is clinging to dry patches, but it isn't looking oily at all, which is a pretty big feat for me. The coverage hasn't faded too much either, which gives me hope for wearing this foundation during the summer if I can find a good shade. I am actually very impressed with the formula of this foundation, but not at all by the colours. The formula has beautiful medium coverage, a beautiful satin finish that is easily mattified by translucent powder, and it lasts pretty well too, only clinging to dry patches in the skin. However, for a shade marketed specifically as yellow based, I don't understand why this is not yellow based. It is now one of the most neutral shades that I own, which for me is really disappointing, because if this is what the warm tone looked like, I can't imagine how odd the neutral tone is going to look like, as well as the cool tone. Like, is the cool tone just straight pink? I don't really understand why the undertone isn't correct, but I also do have to acknowledge my privilege as a white woman that I can at least make it work for me. I know I have it pretty good, so it seems ungrateful to complain that the tone isn't right, but that is still an issue. It's just not the biggest issue in the world. but it still is an issue for me. Like I said at the start of the review, for an East Asian brand, 12 shades is pretty good. It's probably one of the biggest shade ranges that I know of in most Korean or like Japanese beauty, but it's still not really that good in terms of diversity. Even though there are 12 shades, I would say that at least 8 of them are catered for pale skin. I do appreciate that they have darker shades, but they are like caramel at the darkest, and there is not an equal amount of dark shades in comparison to the light shades, and I think if it was to be as inclusive as it should be, there should be an equal amount of darker shades to the lighter shades, regardless of what the brand is and where it is from. And that is pretty much all I'm going to say about the shade range. It's better than it usually is. It is, and I'm grateful for that, but it could be better. Not just for me and my skin tone, but for like everybody else that exists in the world. It sucks for me because the warm tone isn't warm, but in general, like, I can still make it work. I'm wearing it today with a ton, like I literally mean a ton, of the Mercier pressed powder. This is in the shade number 1. I don't know what shade that is, which is like super, super yellow. So like I have loaded my face up with yellow to make the product work, and I can make it work. I have options. It sucks that it doesn't come straight out of the bottle looking like my skin tone, but like that hardly ever happens anyway. I just wish that for a foundation color that is marketed as warm toned, that it would actually be warm toned. But in general,